The Subcommittee for Indigenous Peoples of the United States will now come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on H.R. 2414 to amend the Morris K. Udall and Stuart L. Udall Foundation Act, H.R. 2031, Progress for Indian Tribes Act, H.R. 895, Tribal School Federal Insurance Parity Act, and H.R. 396 to provide for the equitable settlement of certain Indian land disputes regarding land in Illinois and for other purposes. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objections, so ordered. Good morning to you all and a warm welcome to all of our witnesses today. Today we'll be examining 4 pieces of legislation that continue our commitment to tribal sovereignty and self-determination. First, H.R. 2414, introduced by Chairman Grijalva, will reauthorize and amend the Morris K. Udall and Stuart L. Udall Foundation Act. The Udall Foundation conducts research and provides training to Native American and Alaska Native leaders on healthcare issues and tribal policy through the Native Nations Institute for Leadership, Management, and Policy. It also operates Parks in Focus program to provide opportunities for youth to experience our nation's parks and wilderness, and houses the successful U.S. Institute for Environmental Conflict Resolution. In 2012, the leadership of the Udall Foundation worked closely with the Government Accountability Office and the Inspector General and the Department of the Interior to conduct thorough reviews of every program to ensure proper stewardship of the foundation. Earlier last year, GAO and the OIG DOI found that the foundation is operating with all the necessary internal controls and made recommendations on how to better reflect the mission and goals of the foundation. H.R. 2414 will implement those changes and allow the foundation to continue its great work. H.R. 2031, the Progress for Indian Tribes Act, introduced by our colleague from New Mexico, Ms. Holland, will streamline the Department of the Interior's self-governance process and provide Indian tribes with greater flexibility. Pursuant to the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act, tribes are able to enter into self-governing compacts, commonly known as 638 contracts, with BIA and IHS to manage and administer federal Indian programs. Most self-governance tribes manage programs with both IHS and DOI and have achieved great success. However, significant differences between the conditions for DOI contracts and IHS contracts have forced tribes to operate under 2 separate sets of legislative and administrative requirements. H.R. 2031 will reconcile these differences in order to streamline the entire self-government process. H.R. 895, the Tribal School Federal Insurance Parity Act, introduced by Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, amends the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act to restore parity to health benefits at BIE-operated and BIE-funded tribally operated schools. Currently, all BIE-operated schools, as well as 4 BIE-funded tribally operated schools, participate in the Federal Employee Health Benefit Program. However, this eligibility was not extended to tribally controlled schools operating under the Tribally Controlled Schools Act. This has resulted in significant financial strains on those schools, as well as difficulty in recruiting quality educators. H.R. 895 would end this 2-tiered system for federal employee health benefits at BIE schools. Finally, we will consider H.R. 396, introduced by Mr. Mullen from Oklahoma. H.R. 396 would permanently resolve the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma's long-standing land claim to the Wabash River watershed in east central Illinois. The Miami Tribe's ancestral homelands are located south of the Great Lakes in the states of Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. Like many tribes, the Miami were ripped from these homelands and forcibly relocated in the late 1800s, first to Kansas and then to Oklahoma, where they reside today. Prior to being relocated, the Miami was a signatory to the Treaty of Grassland in 1805. Article 4 of that treaty made clear that the tribe possessed approximately 2.6 million acres in the Wabash River watershed, and the United States agreed it would not take any part of that watershed without the consent of the tribal signatories. However, not surprising, over time, the United States placed the land in the public domain and transferred it to settlers without the consent of the Miami tribe or the other signatories, violating the treaty. H.R. 396 extinguishes the tribe's claim to the Illinois land in exchange for a 1-year window for the tribe to bring its case before the United States Court of Federal Claims. Additionally, the bill would eliminate any cloud on title that exists for current landowners in the Wabash watershed lands. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on this important bills today, and I now recognize Ranking Member Cook for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We've got 4 very important bills, and one of the value of this committee, I think, is unlike some of the other committees, is I don't know if this is a correct paraphrasing, but we're trying to correct some of the wrongs of the past to make it better, particularly for the tribes and the tribal members that are involved. A lot of different policy areas, a lot of different states are represented here today. I particularly noticed the bill on self-determination in education. A lot of my colleagues don't realize that my past life, in addition to being in the Marine Corps for 26 years and the state legislature, I was actually a teacher. If you find that, might find that hard to believe with my low IQ and everything, but I heard that I do. You're not getting married today. You don't have to. But it's something very near and dear, and I think this is something extremely important to all the tribes, and something that anything we can do to help the self-determination on education, really. We've got the whole works about health care and group life insurance programs and everything like that. And going back and trying to address some of these land claims. We're going to talk about today. It's very, very difficult, as everyone knows. And I'm going to call out all the lawyers, which is 90% of the audience, perhaps. Sometimes it's your lawyer against our lawyer. And if we could have a, lawyers can't speak day, maybe we could get some things done. But I don't want to get sued, so I'll stop there. And I hope we have a good hearing. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
They only needed all the lawyers.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Now I'd like to transition to our first panel and welcome the members of Congress who wish to testify on bills that they have sponsored. Under our committee rules, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but you may submit a longer statement for the record if you choose. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, the chair of the full committee, Mr. Grajava.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for having this hearing today. Appreciate it very much. I would like to take the opportunity to speak about to the legislation, H.R. 2414, to amend the Morris K. Udall and Stuart L. Udall Foundation Act. Since its founding in 1992, the Morris K. Udall and Stuart Udall Foundation has awarded more than $8 million in scholarships to more than 1,600 students. The foundation has provided over 255 Native American internships from 93 colleges and universities and from over 117 different tribal nations. The foundation is governed by a board of trustees comprised of 13 members. The president of the board is here with us today, Dr. Eberhard, and he'll be joining us, and thank you very much, Eric, for being here. The original legislation authorized a trust fund and provided the foundation the authority to use the interest earned on the fund to award scholarships and fellowships to students working in the areas of environmental policy and to Native American and Alaska Native students. Currently, the foundation also oversees the Native Nations Institute for Leadership, Management, and Policy, and the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy, and the U.S. Institute for Environmental Conflict Resolution. As you can see, the foundation completes a lot of work in the environmental sphere and also within Indian country. As you can see, the Udall Foundation has significantly grown since 1992. H.R. 2414 will streamline and update the original legislation so that it is internally consistent and the authority of the foundation is clearly defined. This bill addresses the work the foundation does, amends definitions to include the term collaboration, clarifies amendments to maintain offices, eliminate the areas where duties do overlap. Again, Mr. Chairman, thank you again for having the hearing, and look forward to the discussion on the legislation. I yield back.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes the gentle lady from New Mexico, the vice chair of the full committee, Ms. Holland.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and good afternoon to all of you. We're so happy that you're here today. I introduced H.R. 2031, the Progress for Indian Tribes Act, to enhance tribal self-governance over programs funded through Department of the Interior. The Indian Self-Determination and Education Act is one of the most important pieces of legislation affecting Indian country in the last 40-plus years as a key driver to improving tribal communities. Title IV of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act provides the legal framework under which tribes can assume control of the department's programs and associated funding, and tailor those programs to the needs of particular Native American communities. And as the Director LeCounte BIA will point out, tribal governments often add their own resources to support the programs and services under self-governance, thereby enhancing the economic impact of program service delivery, a remarkable success. The Progress Act strengthens Title IV by conforming it to Title V, the Department of Health and Human Services self-governance statute. Promoting tribal self-governance and sovereignty has always been a bipartisan effort. Enacted in 1975, the Indian Self-Determination Act was a Nixon-era initiative signed into law by President Gerald Ford, yet strongly supported by Democrats. Over the years, the act has been amended several times by Democratic and Republican-controlled Congresses. That bipartisan support continues today as H.R. 2031 has both Democratic and Republican co-sponsors. Last month, our colleagues in the Senate passed their version of the Progress Act, which is substantively identical to our bill in the House. The reasons for this broad and deep support are many, but they boil down to one essential fact. Tribal self-governance works. Tribes are their own best stewards. Tribal governments are accountable to their people and know their needs far better than federal officials, however well-meaning, ever will. Self-governance allows tribes to administer programs for their people according to their own priorities while promoting the efficient and effective use of federal funding. Shortly, we will hear from my good friend, Chairman Ron Allen of the Jamestown S'Klallam tribe on some of the specific improvements our bill would make to Title IV. This is not a new experience for him. He's been testifying on behalf of predecessor Title IV amendment bills for a very long time. I urge the committee to take his message to heart as he speaks for many other tribal leaders who have helped grow tribal self-governance over the last 30 years. The feedback on the bill from Indian country to my office has been unanimous and enthusiastic in its support, and I urge the committee to work for swift passage of H.R. 2031 in the House. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to my committee member colleagues. I yield.
Thank you, Representative. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Dakota, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, Mr. Chairman. You know, I have sat up on that dais as an off-committee questioner for a different subcommittee, but this is my first opportunity in this room to testify on this side of the table, so thank you for your kindness. The hearing on H.R. 895, it's really about fairness, it's about equity, it's about improving outcomes for tribal students, and that's why I am so grateful for your time today. So, as I suspect you all know, there are a number of different ways that BIE schools can be operated. You know, about 180 or so BIE schools nationally, and they're operated under 3 different systems. So the first system, where BIE directly operates, and there are between 50 and 60, depending on how you count them, schools in that type. The second type would be Section 638 schools, and there are just a handful of those. The third type, and the type that we're going to talk most about today, are those that are operated under a 297 tribal grant. Now those are all BIE schools. And as I've talked to my friends and professionals in the BIE educational universe, they've made it clear to me time and time again that there are dedicated and talented professionals teaching in each of those 3 different types of BIE schools. The jobs they do are similar, they're the same. which is why it's so interesting, and I think unfortunate, that our country treats those employers, treats those employees, those educators so differently from a benefits perspective. I see no compelling policy reason for that differential treatment. And that's why I think we need to close the loophole. And that's really where 895 brings us. That's what that bill would do. It would close this oversight. And I should mention, there's no federal budget impact on HR 895. This is not a budget buster. It's no impact. And before I go any further, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the hard work of people who for years have focused on this issue, like Cecilia Firethunder, who is in the audience. You're gonna hear from her later, and I think that'll be a real treat. I have been grateful for an opportunity to work with her and others as the sponsor of HR 895. So just a little bit of background. In 2010, when Congress permanently reauthorized the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, there was a provision included in that bill that made it clear that Section 638 schools would be eligible to purchase insurance products through the federal employee insurance programs. Now, of course, and those are the Type 2 schools we talked about. Now, the Type 1 schools, the BIE-operated schools, they had always had access to those benefits. Now, for reasons that I don't comprehend, near as I can tell, it was an unintentional oversight. The Type 3 schools we talked about, the tribal grant schools, were not mentioned anywhere in that provision. And as a result, the determination was made that they did not have access to that insurance program for their employees. Now, what this means is that they have to go out and purchase these insurance products for their employees in a more expensive arena. And that means that there are dollars diverted from the core goal, the critically important task of educating tribal students, and those dollars are instead spent on the health insurance benefits. I think everybody here, regardless of what part of the country you live in, regardless of where you fit on the political spectrum, we all have to acknowledge that ensuring that children in tribal areas have access to high-quality education is one of the most critically important challenges facing our country. And that is a challenge, that is a goal that people like Ms. Firethunder and the tribal grant schools in South Dakota and the tribal grant schools across the United States of America struggle with every single day. And if we can pass HR 895, what we do is we can keep from diverting those much-needed funds away from student education. That will free up those resources so they can be used for student outcomes, for student education, and that is going to improve the lives of tribal students across this country. That is a very, very good thing. And so I want to close by thanking the chairman, the subcommittee chairman, the ranking member, and all the members of the subcommittee for the work that you have done and for the work that you will do in the future on this very important piece of legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I ask unanimous consent that Mr. Johnson be allowed to join us on the dais if he wishes. Without objection, so ordered. Moving on to witness introductions for panel 2. I thank the sponsoring members of Congress for their valuable testimony. I now invite panel 2 to please take their places at the witness table. As with our first panel, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be part of the hearing record. When you begin, the lights on the witness table will turn green. After 4 minutes, the yellow light will come on. Your time will have expired when the red light comes on, and I will ask you to please wrap up your statement. I will also allow the entire panel to testify before we question the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Mr. Darrell LeCount, the Director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs at the U.S. Department of Interior.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cook, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Darrell LeCount, and I am the Director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs at the Department of the Interior. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of the Department regarding the following bills. H.R. 2414, a bill to amend the Morris K. Udall and Stuart L. Udall Foundation Act. H.R. 2031, Progress for Indian Tribes Act. H.R. 895, Tribal School Federal Insurance Parity Act. And H.R. 396, a bill to provide for the equitable settlement of certain Indian land disputes regarding land in Illinois. H.R. 2414, the Department supports the Udall Foundation and its mission. Since the Foundation's inception, the Department has had the privilege of hosting Udall interns during the summer months and currently employs multiple Udall Foundation alumni. I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce you to the 2019 Udall Foundation intern for Indian Affairs. She's sitting right behind me. Her name is Julie Combs. She's in red. The Department supports 2414 and the Foundation as a whole. H.R. 2031, Progress for Indian Tribes Act, will amend both Title I and Title IV of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act. The administration supports the principles of self-determination and self-governance, and this bill would improve upon federal coordination and consistency in government-to-government relationships with tribes. Funding agreements under the Self-Determination Act with self-determination and self-governance tribes support robust programs that offer tribes greater success in meeting the needs of its citizens. Oftentimes, tribal governments add their own resources to support the programs and services, thus extending the economic impact of program service delivery. Title IV program authorities support the tenet that tribal governments are often better suited than federal government to address the changing needs of their members. For more than a decade, Indian tribes have worked on updating Title I and Title IV to address various issues to include more non-BIA programs, to streamline the process of negotiating funding agreements, to replicate a contractual relationship that is already in place at the Indian Health Service and the Department of Transportation. The Department recognizes the need for the self-determination and self-governance programs to evolve in step with the times and to increase the frequency of more Title IV funding agreements by offering in this legislation greater latitude in the application process to engage more tribes to become self-governance tribes. The bill looks forward to working with the subcommittee to clarify this bill. The Department looks forward. The Department has not identified any significant impact from H.R. 2031 with the possible exception of one provision, which may result in an obligation to pay additional contract support costs. However, as currently drafted, it is unclear what additional support costs would be covered by this language. We look forward to working with the committee to amend the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act. H.R. 895, the Tribal School Federal Insurance Parity Act, would amend the Indian Health Care Improvement Act to allow tribal grant schools operating under the Tribally Controlled Grant Schools Act to participate in the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program. Presently, Public Law 100-297 prohibits the vast majority of tribally controlled grant schools from participating in the health benefits program, which can create significant financial strains on schools and disadvantage school leaders in recruiting talented educators. The Department supports H.R. 895. H.R. 396 is a bill to provide for the equitable settlement of certain Indian land disputes regarding land in Illinois and for other purposes. In general, the Department would not be supportive of measures that would incur additional liability from any potential Court of Federal Claims award in light of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma's prior activity before the Indian Claims Commission. Preliminary research into the litigation history of the Treaty of Grouseland and other related treaties indicate that other tribes were the proper owners/occupants of the Illinois lands at issue, and that the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma had stipulated that their claims under those treaties were confined within Indiana as relative to other tribal co-signatories. The Department would encourage the subcommittee to pursue further investigation of the claims history to determine whether it is appropriate to grant the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma another opportunity to pursue a claim against the United States related to the Treaty of Grouseland, notwithstanding the Indian Claims Commission Act's absolute bar on any available claims that were not timely presented before the Indian Claims Commission. The Department would be happy to assist the committee and bill sponsor with that research. My conclusion, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I would be glad to answer any questions the subcommittee may have.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Eric D. Eberhard, the chair of the Board of Trustees for Morris K. and Stuart L. Udall Foundation.
Ranking Member Cook Thank you, Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cook, the other members of the subcommittee, and the staff of the subcommittee for this hearing today. We look forward to working with you going forward to ensure the passage of H.R. 2414. We also want to thank Chairman Grijalva, Chairman Gallego, Representatives Cole, Kirkpatrick, Howland, O'Halloran, and Case for their sponsorship of H.R. 2414. And we want to recognize and acknowledge the work that's being done in the Senate on the companion bill there, S. 1345, introduced by Senators Heinrich, Alexander, Sinema, and McSally. S. 1345 was marked up in the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works on June 19th and reported to the Senate with the recommendation that it be passed. It is the identical companion to H.R. 2414. As Chairman Grijalva indicated, the legislation establishing the foundation was enacted in 1992 in honor of Mo Udall and his 30 years of service here in the Congress and his lasting impact on the nation's environment, public lands, and natural resources, as well as his support of the rights of Native Americans and Alaska Natives and his commitment to their self-governance. The original enabling legislation has been amended 5 times since 1992. 3 of those amendments were very significant. The first in 1998 was the Environmental Policy and Conflict Resolution Act, which created the U.S. Institute for Environmental Conflict Resolution as a program of the foundation. It assists parties in resolving environmental, public lands, and natural resource conflicts that involve federal agencies or federal interest. In 2000, the Congress authorized the foundation to provide policy analysis and management and leadership education to tribal and Native leaders. And the third substantial amendment was enacted in 2009, and it added Stuart L. Udall to the name of the foundation in recognition of his public service to the nation over the years. The enabling legislation, as it has been amended over the years, has become internally inconsistent and contains provisions that are duplicative. H.R. 2414, as Chairman Grijalva noted, updates and streamlines the original enabling legislation so that it is internally consistent and the authority of the Udall Foundation is defined more clearly and any duplication of authority is eliminated. H.R. 2414 also recognizes the Stuart L. Udall Parks in Focus program, which carries out one of the original purposes of the Udall Foundation by providing the nation's youth with opportunities to learn about and experience the nation's parks, wilderness, and other outdoor areas. It recognizes the Native Nation Institute, which carries out the amendment enacted in 2001 to conduct policy analysis and provide education and training to Native American and Alaska Native leaders. It also clarifies the authority of the U.S. Institute for Environmental Conflict Resolution to carry out the amendments that were enacted in 1998. Those amendments were sponsored by the late Senator John McCain. He was also a sponsor of the original legislation in 1992. H.R. 2414 would recognize Senator McCain's leadership in shaping the role and the work of the Udall Foundation by adding his name to the U.S. Institute. I want to note that the U.S. Institute has been involved in about 650 cases over the years. It's conducted over 150 training programs. It has generated about $59 million in earned revenue, of which about $44 million has been outsourced to private sector environmental conflict resolution professionals. In a typical year, the Institute works with and assists about 30 other federal agencies to resolve environmental disputes. It has worked in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and Guam, and that concludes my oral statement. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes the Honorable W. Ron Allen, the Chairman and CEO of the Jamestown, and I apologize if I messed up, S'Klallam Tribe, and Chairman of the Board for the Self-Governance Communication Education Tribal Consortium.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm honored to be able to come and testify on behalf of H.R. 2030, the Progress Act for American Indian Tribes. This has been quite a journey for me. My career started in 1975 when I first got elected in my council, and the year that the Self-Determination Act was actually passed and changed the way the 573, it was less back then, it was 556 at the time, our relationship with the federal government. And it's been quite a journey in the early days of Snyder Act to self-determination grants, and now into the self-governance funding agreements and compacts. And so this legislation hopefully will wrap up basically a journey that's taken a couple of decades of negotiations with the administration and negotiations with Congress, both houses, with regard to how we can continue to move self-governance forward. I want to thank Congressman Young, Congressman Holland, for being the prime sponsors and moving this agenda forward. They know that why it's been important to us, and then all the other co-sponsors that signed onto this bill. It is truly a bipartisan agenda. It is a relationship between the American Indian tribes, American Indian and Alaska Native tribes, and the United States government. This, I had the privilege of being one of the first 7 tribes back in 1988 when this concept emerged in Congress, and many of my colleagues, in fact, all of my colleagues, have passed on. So I'm kind of like the last man standing here from the original initiative with this self-governance movement. What it is about empowering tribes. It's about recognizing tribes' authority and jurisdiction over our affairs. It's enabling us to take federal resources and using them more efficiently and more effectively relative to the needs of our communities. It's recognizing that our indigenous peoples are different from north to south and east to west. And then we know better how best to use these precious federal resources in order to advance our agenda for our self-determination, self-governing, and self-reliance agenda to help us become more independent, less reliant on the federal government and other resources. So it allows us to do a number of things. It provides better clarifying reasoning from the federal government, particularly the administration, regarding reasons why not, so that we know what our challenges are if they do not want us to go into self-governance. It prohibits the federal government from imposing unauthorized terminology in our negotiations. It establishes clear process and timelines and final offers so we can get responses back, so we can conclude negotiations for a compact and a funding agreement. It eliminates ambiguity on the Title IV agreements and makes them consistent with Title V over in the Indian Health Service. It reinforces mechanism over the awarding funding. It specifies as processes and evidentiary standards and waiver requests to expedite our claims. And it clarifies construction and program roles and responsibilities to assure public safety and prudence. And last but not least, it establishes clear payment schedules and procedures. So I want to just say that Congresswoman Holland made the comment, self-governance works. I can show you of the current 585 tribes in the Department of Interior, the 375 tribes in the Indian Health Service, self-governance works. It's working effectively. Do we have bumps and challenges along the way in terms of implementing it, making them work, providing greater clarity? It works effectively and responsibly. It is the best way to use limited, precious federal resources to help advance the Indian country's agenda into the 21st century. So we believe that this efficiency, that the way that we're doing business in Indian country, our relationship with the federal government is working more effectively. This legislation will help us. Last but not least, I would just like to say we worked hard on both houses regarding what this legislation should look like. And so time is running out. This has happened to us numerous times in past sessions. And so we would hope that you can accept this bill that as being proposed by the Senate and to get this wrapped up so that we can move on with challenges that we have in Indian country. So I thank you for the opportunity and look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Ms. Cecilia Firethunder, President of Oglala Lakota Nation Education Coalition.
Let me greet you in my language first. I greet you with warm feelings from my heart.
If your microphone on is Ms. Firethunder.
Okay, now?
Thank you.
Very
We'll add
good.
time.
Thank you. Chairman Gallego, Ranking Member Cook, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Cecilia Firethunder. I'm a member of the Oglala Lakota Nation and president of the Oglala Lakota Nation Education Coalition, which represents 6 tribally controlled schools on the Oglala Sioux tribe located on a Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. I am here to speak on H.R. 895, the Tribal School Federal Insurance Parity Act. The Federal Employee Health Benefits Program is an employer health insurance program administered by the Office of Personnel Management. Federal employees have a high level of choice in finding a plan that fits their needs and budgets. Premiums vary by plan type, within the 75% of costs covered by the federal government and the remainder by the employee. We fully support H.R. 895 for immediate benefits and savings for our schools. H.R. 895 would amend the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act to authorize tribal entities operating under the Tribal Controlled Schools Act of 1999 to access FEHB. This simple and clean legislative fix would directly benefit our schools by allowing them to access lower health insurance options at significant overall savings. Savings already enjoyed and by the BIE state schools, system schools. I'd like to at this time tell you these 6 schools employ 516 people who could benefit from this health insurance. 6 of the 13 schools located on a Pine Ridge Indian Reservation are tribally controlled grant schools. Our tribally controlled grant schools have always provided health insurance benefits. As a 638 program, we endeavor to provide services to our communities. Many of our schools, however, struggle to cover the cost of high health insurance premiums and deductibles as they have escalated tremendously in the last 5 years. Some schools make up the funding shortfall through the diversion of ISEP dollars, which are meant to support instructional services. When we use ISEP funds to cover health insurance and other program costs, we reduce the amount of money available for teachers and classroom needs. This in turn directly affects the educational services our students receive. In 2012, our tribal control schools applied to participate in the federal employee health benefits. Title IV of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act authorizes tribal entities operating under DEAA to access FEHB. We understood that we were able to join based on this provision. However, the Interior Solicitor and OPM, determined that we were ineligible because though we have the authority to administer 638 contracts or compacts, we operate under the Tribally Controlled Schools Act of 1988. As a result, BIE-operated schools can access FEHB, but tribally controlled grant schools cannot. This is simply unjust. We are both part of the same system. We both share the same mission of providing high-quality education. We both serve the same populations, recruit from the same employee pool, and we both seek to advance the same interests of tribal self-determination in education. Yet, we each spend dramatically different amounts of money on employee health insurance benefits. For example, my school, Little Wound School in Kyle, South Dakota, offer the healthcare package to Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Dakota at a monthly per employee cost to the school of $954 with a $5,000 deductible. Little Wound currently pays 100% of our total cost. In contrast, Pine Ridge School, a BIE-operated school, is able to offer a plan through FEHB at a monthly per employee cost of $348 with a $500 deductible. So today we are hoping that our message is heard, and on behalf of all of not only the tribal schools on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, but 130 schools in Indian country could benefit from this action. So we certainly are looking to have your support on this, and I will be here to answer questions. Pila maya, pimitakuyap.
Great, thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes the Honorable Douglas G. Langford, Chief of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma.
Chairman Gallego and honorable members of the subcommittee, Aya, Akim Echipungwea, Waynes Wani, Nila Miamia. My name is Doug Langford, and I'm Chief of the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma. I want to thank the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify in support of H.R. 396, a bill that would permanently resolve the tribe's treaty-based land claim to the Wabash Rivershed in east central Illinois, permanently resolving the cloud on title created for the landowners in Illinois. The bill accomplishes this by doing two things. First, it gives the United States Court of Federal Claims, CFC, the authority to decide whether the United States took lands that were protected by the 1805 Treaty of Grouseland without paying the tribe. And second, it extinguishes the tribe's claim to those lands which will forever eliminate the cloud on title for landowners. The Miami Tribe of Oklahoma is a federally recognized Indian tribe. Our ancestral homelands are located south of the Great Lakes in what are now the states of Indiana, Illinois, and Ohio. In 1846, the tribe was removed from its homelands to what is now the state of Kansas, and in 1867 was again removed from Kansas to the Indian Territory, now the state of Oklahoma. Our seat of government is located in Ottawa County in northeast Oklahoma. In 1805, the Miami tribe and its relatives, the Eel River Band and the Weas, signed a Treaty of Grouseland with the United States. Article 4 of that treaty made it clear that the tribe had not ceded the land in the Wabash River watershed, and the United States had agreed that it would not take any part of that watershed without the consent of each of the tribes. The United States never asked the tribe for that treaty-protected land. The tribe never allowed the United States to take that treaty-protected land, and the United States never negotiated with or paid the tribe for that land. Yet over time, the United States placed the land into the public domain and transferred it to the settlers. H.R. 396 extinguishes the cloud on title created by the tribe's land claim, and in exchange for a one-year window for the tribe to bring its case before the CFC. Extinguishment of the claim and the cloud on title does not depend on the tribe's success in that litigation. The claim is extinguished and the titles are cleared regardless of the results of the CFC litigation. The tribe has worked closely and diligently with congressional leadership from Illinois, with the local leaders in Illinois, especially those in the affected treaty area, and with the Illinois Farm Bureau to develop a bill that would resolve once and for all this claim and its effects on title. The solution in H.R. 396 is based on a solution presented in 2001 by the Illinois delegation in H.R. 791 and in S. 533. Those bills were referred to committee but did not make it to the floor and for a vote and expired with the end of the Congress and were not reintroduced. The solution proposed by the Illinois delegation made sense then, and it makes sense now. Finally, I think it is important to note in this time of tight budgets at home, in states, and here in D.C., 396 is not a land claim settlement bill. It does not authorize any payments to the tribe. All it does is give us our day in court. We still have to make our case and win it, and if we win it, the United States will pay the judgment from the Federal Judgment Fund, and Congress has already appropriated money for. So if we get a judgment, Congress does not have to appropriate new monies for it, the CBO does not have to score it, and it would not be an earmark. The solution makes sense because it addresses both the current and historic landowners' needs at the same time. The current landowner's title is cleared, and the people of the Miami tribe get their day in court. Ms. Shenewe, thank you to you, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee members for this opportunity to testify in support of this bill. And a special thank you to Congressman Mullen for his leadership and assistance on this bill. I will be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you also for your testimony. I want to thank all the expert witnesses for their powerful testimonies, reminding the members that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chairman will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask of the witnesses. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Chairman Allen, in your testimony, you touch on the DOI published regulations that followed the 1994 enactment of Title IV and the concerns that tribal nations expressed in their wake. Can you expand on the failures of these regulations that follow the enactment of Title IV?
Expand on the, say it again, Chairman?
Can you expand on the failures of these regulations that follow the enactment of Title IV?
Probably one of the, there's a number of them in terms of the funding agreements that we negotiate. Probably the one that is the most pressing and challenging is when tribes negotiate for their fair share of all these many line items. There's about 120 or 25 line items in the Bureau's budget that we can negotiate. When we don't agree, unfortunately, in Title V, there's a final offer opportunity so that they have to respond back to us. In the BIA on Title IV, we don't have that final offer opportunity. So probably a good example would be go down to New Mexico area, Pueblo tribes, Apache tribes. Well, there's only, of the 19 Pueblos, for example, there's probably only 4 that are actually that have negotiated as a funding agreement. Many want to negotiate, but they can't get their the information they need, and they're met up with recalcitrants, and they can't put a final offer. So many of those tribes in that region would probably be more involved. So that's an example where it's not working. In the area of construction, we need better clarity about how we take over construction projects and programs, and then in terms of what the tribal role is. It provides that specificity, what the Bureau's role is, what the tribe's role is, so that we can run these construction projects much more efficiently. So those are things that we've experienced. There's other examples in there that improve the way we do business. Another one, there's one more I'll use in Title V, we can use the investment of the resources we negotiate, and we can aggregate all of our resources. So if it's $1 million or $10 million, whatever the number is, we can aggregate and we can put it into a bank and work out an arrangement with the bank to protect the integrity of the money. With the BIA, we don't have that same standard. So it means that we have to take all these different monies and we have to put them into different institutions based on the FDIC 250,000 range. It's not an efficient way to manage a large sum of money for the implementation throughout the year. So those are examples that we're fixing, and it just basically helps us improve our operation and makes our the management of these federal resources more efficient.
Thank you. Let me turn to Chief Lankford. Can you further elaborate on the tribe's work with local Illinois stakeholders in the making of this legislation?
I didn't hear all that.
Can you further elaborate on the tribe's work with local Illinois stakeholders in the making of this legislation?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, we've done quite extensive work to make sure that with the Farm Bureau's help, that we have crafted something that we feel like covers all of the affected landowners properly. The tribe is very interested in making sure that these landowners are made whole in this, so.
And just a kind of further clarification, what ways are these local stakeholders supporting this legislation in terms of passing resolutions in support of this legislation or other elected officials in support of legislation from the state of Illinois?
Well, that's, I don't know exacts, but what I do know is that the landowners are happy to have clear title. Those cause all kinds of problems for the landowners. It causes problems for the title insurance, extra paperwork. It reduces what their land values are. It causes them problems at the bank, and so pretty much everyone that we've reached out to would be in favor of resolving these problems for the landowners.
Okay, great, thank you. I yield back my time and recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Ms. Fire Thunder, I have to tell you, my name is Cook. It's such a blah name. You've got a great name there. I wish, I know it's an election year coming up, they would accuse me, but that is a great name. So sorry. Chief Langford,
Yes, sir.
do you have an estimate of the worth of, your claims in Illinois? I mean, have they put a dollar figure or anything on that, or?
I do not have an exact. I mean, that's what the Court of Claims will do, if I understand. I mean, it's 2.5 million acres, so I don't know.
Yeah, but is that worth, well, I won't ask whether that's in San Bernardino County property values or Beverly Hills property. It makes a difference, I think. I was just trying to get the litigation and everything else, and I, to be honest with you, my comment about the lawyer is kind of trying to figure out that question. I think it's going to be extremely difficult on your issue there. Going back to qualified teachers, and Mr. LeConte, on your how this is always an issue, and whoever wants to jump in on this, in ensuring that we have great education and qualified teachers. That's always, I think, a problem. And teachers that are qualified, that I think a number of years ago, I don't think you had that emphasis on you did on, but a qualified teacher and a great teacher, I think, can make a tremendous amount of difference. But one that understands your tribal issues, your history, so it's not for everybody. I think if you're going to have certain teachers there, and I'm preaching now, they have to have the passion to believe in what they're talking about, because there's a lot of history, a lot of things there, and they have got to understand what education best fits the tribes. If any comment on that from anybody, or am I just preaching for the NEA?
Yes.
I guess?
Yes. We wholeheartedly support the bill. It's very difficult for the BIE to recruit, as is. These are oftentimes not locations that individuals want to go work at, so you have to have as many incentives as you can to get the good ones, as you spoke about. And I think this would go a long ways in helping that particular situation. But it goes right back to that. What are the package benefits? When you look for a job anywhere, you look at what they are, and particularly if it's in a location that really probably wasn't on the top of your list.
Any incentives, such as perhaps tuition-free master's or PhD program in Indian Studies at an accredited university?
The BIA uses whatever incentives they can to recruit. And if those are part of it, I think in some cases they probably are repaying student loans and that sort of thing.
Well, that's my next question, because everybody just has student loans. At least the students nowadays are members of our family and everything like that. And I think they're paying to next 100 years or something. But it's those would be great incentives if we could, particularly when they specialize in a particular area, such as the studies that we're talking about. So if you've looked at that, I'm very, very happy to hear that. Any recruitment that we can do, or be interested if you have any suggestions on that. And I yield back. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, fine, thank you. On my reservation, we have a tribal college called Oglala Lakota College, sir. We have been meeting with the college because we have a really strong teaching program there. The other area we recruit teachers is TFA, Teach for America Teachers, and we have a really close working relationship with the administration at TFA. One of the reasons why we're able to recruit and keep some of the TFA teachers is to be able to offer them health insurance benefits, visual and dental. We have worked very diligently, sir, for many, many years to close the gap for teacher shortage. 100% of my administrators at my school are tribal members. Superintendent of our school, principal at high school, middle, and elementary. All of our counselors are certified counselors. They're all tribal members, sir. We have come a long way in our own people getting the necessary education to come home and teach and take care of our people, and we're making strong headway. So we're excited about it. So on my reservation, we are working together diligently, schools, tribal councils, to continue to promote and encourage training to be teachers so we grow our own. And finally, you know what? I also am looking for more men to be in the classroom because we have more female teachers than males, so we are making a really strong appeal to our community, especially our high school students, especially our male high school students, to consider being a teacher. Thank you.
Well, it just so happens that after I retire from Congress, I think I'm going back in the classroom, and if I can find one. And by the way, when I was there, they had this online, rateyourprofessor.com, and they actually rated me with very high marks, except that they said I had a very dull name, and if I had a name
This is not
like
a job interview. This is not.
Thank you.
It's pot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now recognize Representative Holland.
Thank you, Chairman. My first question will be for Chairman Allen. Chairman Allen, in your testimony, you describe how self-governance tribes must operate under two sets of administrative requirements under Titles 4 and 5 of the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, one for the Indian Health Service and another for Bureau of Indian Affairs. Can you further discuss what the practical difference is for these two different sets of administrative requirements, and how has the difference in administrative requirements affected tribal nations on the ground?
So, Congressman Holland, I thank you for the question. It's basically two sets of rules. One, in terms of the administrative implementation or administration of both funding agreements. So, fiscally, the example I used earlier about the fiscal management of the resources that we negotiate on the IHS versus the BIA, we have to manage them very differently. This bill would allow us to manage them exactly the same, so it makes it much cleaner and easier. It makes it harder to redesign the programs that we have. So where we would normally take both programs and under the same rules, and then we would blend them and design programs, both healthcare and community service programs and other programs that we run under the BIA, and make them more effectively designed to fit our tribe more effectively. With the two different administrative rules, there's a bit of a firewall in between the two. Makes it more difficult, makes it more challenging. It's more challenging for administratively in terms of how we report it, how we use it, and implement the program. So, and that's what we're trying to do. We realized after the Title V negotiation, Title IV was up front. It was the first one we negotiated in '94. Took us 5 years to do that. But in Title V, it took us a fair amount of time as well. But we realized that it was, we learned some lessons from Title IV, and then we negotiated them into Title V. Now that we're trying to adjust Title IV to be the same as Title V, allowing us to be much more efficient with the use of these federal resources. Programmatically, it just allows us to be more creative with how we design our programs to fit our community priorities.
Thank you so much. And further, do you think there will be a significant increase in the number of tribes entering self-governance under DOI when the Progress Act is finally enacted, just in your experience?
It will increase tribes because the final offer is the big one in terms of negotiations. There are a number of tribes out there who are highly interested in getting involved and wanting to negotiate, and they run into roadblocks. So basically, the roadblock of not being able to provide a final offer if they're in a recalcitrant position over any compromise, then the final offer provides us an opportunity to close the deal and move into a funding agreement. So I mentioned the Pueblo tribes is a good example, and I can tell you a lot more are interested in the Southeast where you're from, and Alaska, where, you know, the largest number of tribes that are in Indian country are in Alaska, and they're all in self-governance, but most of them are in IHS and less are in BIA, so quite a few of them would join in on the BIA side. The actual number, it probably will be a fair number, meaning probably dozens. You know, we're making great progress now at 285 for the BIA and 375 on the IHS. But now you're getting into the areas where tribes are being more cautious of the larger tribes, larger land-based tribes, larger populated tribes, making sure that they're comfortable with it. I remember when Navajo was not certain about it. Now it is in self-governance on the IHS side. So things are changing, and they're getting more comfortable realizing that we're not absolving treaty rights, we're not absolving the trust responsibility. What we are doing is providing the tribes greater discretion on how to use these federal resources.
And in my last 10 seconds, can you provide a few examples on how the transition to tribal self-governance has been successful in your community?
For my tribe, I guess one of the best examples is it allows us to have greater leverage with these resources. So we're able to leverage them, seeking other resources out there, and allowed us to expand our programs to provide better quality services. And I think that's one of the biggest things. The other one is just how we can take the resources from multiple line items and combine them. Sometimes the line items wasn't a lot of money, sometimes the line item was a fair amount, and you put them together and redesign it to better fit your tribe and make the programs work more efficiently and not in silos.
Thank you, Chairman. I yield, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Holland. I now yield time to Representative Young.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the panel. It's a long thing. That I don't think any of these bills are really controversial, but I have a question for the director. Currently, there's 285 tribes participating in self-governance in DOI, and it's anticipated that new tribes will want to enter into the program after the Progress Act is enacted. Does the department have plans to reconstruct to meet this new reality and transfer staff and resources to the Office of Self-Governance?
I haven't had that particular conversation with the Assistant Secretary, but I can assure you that that's certainly something that, in all due diligence, we would absolutely look at, yes.
I thank you, because one thing I do not appreciate is when we pass a law, then someone doesn't fulfill the obligations of the law. So just look at the structure and see what you do to make it work, because there will be more tribes. And in your statement, the bill has a possible impact and may result in an obligation to pay additional contract support costs. So you're not really sure about the impact if we do pass this law?
We're not positive, that is correct. We're just trying to point out that please look at everything.
Okay, but I think the tribes are already entitled to, in law, to be paid the reasonable expenses of their governing bodies by carrying out program oversight function, are they not?
That is absolutely correct. We just don't want anyone to forget.
All right, I appreciate it. Again, I want to thank the panel, and I'm one of the few last standing too, by the way. Keep that in cap. And I yield back.
Thank you, Representative. I now yield to the chairman of the committee, Chairman Grijalva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Eberhard, just elaborate a little more for the committee on the University of Arizona's Native Nations Institute and the role that the Udall Foundation has in those programs, and how will the amendments to HR 2414 more accurately reflect what that relationship is now?
Thank you, Chairman Grijalva. And thank you for summarizing the accomplishments of the other education programs in your opening statement. The Native Nations Institute started in 2000, and it was a joint project of the University of Arizona and the foundation. It is housed in the Udall Center. It has steadily grown. With the help of the appropriations committees on both sides of the Hill, we've been able to provide resources to NNI to allow it to develop what I think is the finest curriculum for Indigenous governance in the world. People come from all over the world to talk to the experts at NNI. We've also been able to build on the incredible scholarship that was done through the Harvard Project for Indian Economic Development that was headed up by Steve Cornell and Joe Cult. And Steve Cornell became the executive director of the Udall Center and was able to help us make that connection with Harvard. So we've been able to import into the work of NNI all of the scholarship and empirical analysis on economic development that was undertaken at Harvard in the 1990s. And that has become part of the indigenous governance approach that NNI uses. NNI has provided nation-building services to individuals and groups that represent, at the present time, about 53% of the federally recognized tribes in 21 states in the lower 29 states in the lower 48, and has worked with entities in Alaska. About 430 Indian and Native leaders have participated in NNI's Indigenous governance programs. And that was just for the period between 2013 and 2019. And since 2014, NNI's Indigenous Governance Database, which is an online research database, has had about 70,000 unique visitors, and those visitors have reviewed and accessed over 250,000 pages of research in support of tribal governance. We think of NNI as a vital part of our work with the tribes throughout the country. And what the legislation will do with respect to NNI is incorporate it into the statute as one of the education programs of the foundation. That was an issue that came up in the course of the IG's audits in particular, when they took a careful look for us at the education programs. The statute lists 3 education programs, and NNI was not expressly included in that list. So we wanted to make sure that we create a statutory basis for the work that we're doing. And that was the reason that we worked with you and other members of the House and of the Senate to try to incorporate that language into the amendments.
Yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Does the committee have any more questions for our panel? No? You good? Yeah. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, the question about the contract support costs with regard to the self-governance, it is covered by Section 204.
Chairman Allen, just before we get going, to whose questions are you
I
responding
think it was
For the record.
Congressman Young, or, yeah, I think it was Congressman Young who asked
Okay,
that
thank you.
question.
In response to Congressman Young's question.
Yeah, and I want to make
used some
sure
time.
that
You'd like
it's
to go.
clear
Yes.
that dealing with contract support costs with the funding agreements or 638 is covered by Section 204, and it identifies clearly following OMB rules on recovery of contract support, both direct, indirect, and direct, and up to 50% of the administrative costs. So you negotiate your rate, and that's clear. And Congress has already established how those funds would be covered for those kinds of agreements, whether it's a self-governance funding agreement or whether it's a 638 contract.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you for clarification. Mr. Langford,
if you'd indulge me, the suits passed me. Of all the questions they practiced with me over the last couple of weeks, your two questions were not on there, but I would like to take the opportunity to, there was time, to answer your question, there was time spent in Springfield.
let's get this organized. Can we grant Mr. Langford 5 minutes in response to my questions?
I will not take that long.
Like, the minutes on this are going to be a little jumbled, so I just want to make sure we're getting it as linear as possible. Go ahead, Mr. Langford.
But there was time spent in Springfield. There was time spent in work with the local representation in those areas, with their reps, the state reps, and with some of the farmers, I believe. To answer the ranking member's question, the basis was on 1800s values on that property, and at about $2 an acre, sir, was what we have. That was our estimates.
I heard a figure of $30 billion.
No. That was in 1800s.
Maybe it was my wife talking about shopping or something.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Langford. Anybody else want to jump in since we've just gone off the wheel here? Great. I thank our panels of expert witnesses for their insightful testimony and the members for their questions. The members of this committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 30, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.